As a designer, you might have heard a lot about the importance of impact. And if you hear that word and you think, oh my gosh, what impact? My project doesn't have any impact. Or how do I communicate impact when I don't have any work that has shipped? Or maybe I only have school projects. Well, don't worry, in this video today, I'm going to give you some pointers on what impact is and some alternative different kinds of impact you can talk about in your project if you don't have any business impact or your projects haven't shipped. So we're going to start by talking about what impact is, why it is important, what to do if you don't have business impact, and then at the end I'm also going to run you through my own presentation where I talk about impact I've had from a design perspective. So not necessarily business impact, but other ways I've contributed to impact as a designer. Alright, so what is impact? Well, impact is the most commonly talked about in the context of business impact. And this often refers to how did your project contribute towards any increase or lift in business metrics. You might be asked in an interview or expected to talk about in a case study how your project led to or resulted in business impact. So this could be in context to any business metrics. You may also be expected to reflect on the goals that you set at the beginning of a project and what kind of impact your project had in the context of those goals. Did you meet them? Did you overachieve them? Underachieve them? What was the impact of the project? I really like this quote from Precious Matabuke, who wrote in a Medium article, "For us designers to stay relevant and still have a seat at the table, we must be aware of how we impact business." And I think that sums it up really well, because if you can't draw the correlation between your efforts in design to how it is impacting the business at the bottom line or at the end of the day, then ultimately how can we expect people to value design for what it is? It is always worth having some awareness over the business impact of your project. And if you are working at a company or in a team, if you have some work that has shipped and you aren't aware of what the business impact is, go and talk to your product manager or go and talk to your data scientist. They are bound to have some of this business impact already in their back pocket, and so it could just be a conversation to be had. I've mentioned a few times on this channel as well about how I always make sure to include business impact whenever I'm talking about my work. So that could be in the context of a portfolio presentation, it could be in an interview, a design job interview, it could be at the end of a case study. So always be prepared to talk about it. The actual metric that communicates the business impact of your project is going to differ depending on the company you're at or the goal of the project. Some examples of business impact might be things like increase in sales or conversion rate or orders, or it could also be things like decrease in drop-off or decrease in abandoned cart or decrease in account cancellations. Again, make sure you know what the goal of the project was, and if you don't know what that is, talk to your team and establish a goal up front and talk about how you're going to measure success. So why is this important? Well, not only will you probably be expected to know this and talk about this in interviews and case studies and things like that, but impact also shows the value of design. It can also hint to people your design skills and capabilities. As you provide more business impact, you're probably going to get given more and exciting opportunities and higher responsibilities. Impact also signals to people the kind of return on investment they can expect from design. And this can be really valuable for maybe you're applying at somewhere that you might be the first designer, maybe they don't have design yet, it could be a really early stage startup. If you can show the impact that design can have, they are going to be super impressed by that and probably more likely to hire you if you can show exact examples of how you have provided impact to a team or a company. The more closely you can tie your design decisions, your design input, your contribution towards a project to the business impact or the impact of that project, the more perceived value you can bring to a team. Okay, so what if you don't have business impact? Maybe you're still studying, you don't have a finished project, or you don't have work that is shipped, or maybe you just don't have access to this kind of information. I think there's other types of impact that are equally as valuable and important that you can talk about and share. And I like to call that design impact. Design impact can include a number of things. In my experience, some examples of things that I correlate to design impact are things like improvements to design documentation, influence on team culture and processes? Is there something you can point to that you did or you learned in this project that ultimately led to design impact? Maybe, for example, when you started the project, there was no design system, but throughout the project, you realized, hey, we really need a design system for this. And then maybe you went out and built one. That is a great example of design impact. You've realized a problem or an area of opportunity, and you've taken the initiative to improve that not only for yourself, but for the whole design team. Another example is maybe you think the design handoff process that you have in your team is inefficient and it's not working very well. Maybe you then end up collaborating with an engineer and figuring out how to streamline that process and how to improve it for the rest of the team. Are there moments like that where throughout a project you've seen that opportunity, you've made an improvement, and it's turned out to be really impactful for the rest of the team? I have a few examples of these myself that I want to share with you now. Alright, here we are in Figma, and I'm going to walk you through a presentation that I've put together and previously presented in job interviews, all about the impact I've had in relation to design. And I called this presentation Building a UX Practice because I wanted to share some of the stories about things that I've done and impact that I've contributed to in relation to building a UX practice and craft at a company. So here we go, let's do it. The first section is around design excellence in the context of an internal setting, so within a design team. First example I have here is design documentation, and here I talk a little bit about how I built internal sites to act kind of as a source of truth, to document the design process, any updates in relation to the design and project, and also the decisions made throughout a project. So here on the right is a visual example of an internal website that I created for a project that I was working on around lending. So this is one example of how you can contribute towards impact in your team. Maybe you see opportunities to sort of level up their design documentation and how you capture all of the design decisions made, or how you manage a source of truth in relation to a design project. Next is a workshop that I created and put together around Figma for engineers. So I saw that a lot of the engineers that I was working with at Uber were not really savvy with how to use Figma. They hadn't had any training on how to use Figma, and so that resulted in me having to be really meticulous in my design handoff, which was really time consuming and really frustrating. So I thought, okay, what if I can just better train our engineers on how to use Figma so I don't have to do all of the redlining for handoff. So this was sort of an internal side project I did and put together, and it was sort of a whole presentation workshop to help educate our engineers and inform them on how to use Figma. So the impact of this is that ultimately it led to improving the design to engineering handoff. The next one is around team process. So I consulted a lot with design leadership on how we can improve our design practice, giving feedback and suggestions on how to write out critiques or design reviews, and all those kind of process things around a design team that ultimately I think helped improve a lot of team culture and relationships that I had with other people. So I frequently worked with our design operations folks to improve processes and practices on the team. So one, for example, was around collaborating with engineers and bug bashes and design handoff, kind of related to the two examples prior. But I wanted to highlight this because I feel like I played a really active role in contributing towards what is the culture we wanted on our design team. All right, that kind of leads into the next section really nicely, which is on design culture. And so one of the things I was really heavily involved with during my time in Amsterdam was the Uber Design Nights. And so I kind of helped organize and run these big design night events. We'd have 200 plus attendees per event, which was kind of crazy. And we had a lot of guest speakers. We would collaborate with other companies that wanted to come and speak at our event. And so I was kind of running these on top of my full-time job. We did like one a quarter, I think, so pretty regularly. And I wanted to highlight this because I think this was really impactful for the Amsterdam team. We got a lot more people interested in working on our team in Amsterdam. We got kind of a bit of a reputation and a name within the local Amsterdam design community. So I felt like this was really important to highlight. The next is around team newsletters. So I initiated, created, and sort of curated the Amsterdam Studio newsletter, which was sort of an internal design newsletter we sent out once a month to the wider design team and our Amsterdam counterparts. They kind of had an update about the design team, some of the projects we're working on, any people updates, resources, things like that. And I kind of continued doing this on the Uber Eats team, where I ran and curated the design index, and that got sent out to, again, I think like the whole design org and the whole Uber Eats org. We did that more like every 6 weeks, like everybody contributed towards giving updates on their projects and the status of their work. So yeah, did a lot of like running internal newsletters, which was really fun. Also sometimes really challenging because you'd have to like chase people up and follow up with people. But I think this was also a really good example of design impact, because it was about showing the work that we're doing as a team to others within the organization. Next is Toronto events. So when I eventually relocated to Toronto, I didn't do design nights anymore in Toronto. Amsterdam kind of continued that tradition. But one thing I did do was co-organize jam days with an engineer friend of mine. It was kind of like a hackathon, but we wanted to call it jam days to kind of be more inclusive. And another thing I ran was book club. So these are kind of 2 different events that I was running for the Toronto tech team, that were kind of like happening every 6 to 8 weeks or so. And again, just wanted to show that I had this initiative to run and organize and create these events as like sort of a cultural initiative for the team. Next around design culture is design social. So I ran the Uber Design Twitter account during my entire tenure at Uber, very secretly and stealthily. Nobody really knew outside of Uber that it was me behind the account. But that was really, really fun. I also contributed to our Medium, to our Dribble account, and a bit to our Instagram as well. So just showing the contributions that I was sort of providing towards the social aspect of the design culture and team at Uber. All right, team branding. So I wasn't the designer behind these beautiful logos you see on the right, but I did help consult and initiate. So for example, for the design nights we were doing, we wanted some stickers. So that was kind of part of the design nights, and then also some of the public events that we did in Toronto. So I just helped kind of consult and sort of help contribute towards what our branding would be as a team. All right, and the last section is on external stuff, so giving back to the public or wider design community. And the following projects I'm going to share are probably not new to you because you're watching me on YouTube. You know that I teach product design and research on YouTube, so I highlight that as well because I think that is really, really impactful. Some of these numbers are outdated, but that is fine. I also have a podcast all about design that I do with Charlie. I also provide mentoring over on SuperPear, so helping people one-on-one advance in their design careers or work through challenges that they're having with regards to their design career. And then also a lot of public speaking. I've given workshops, I've spoken publicly at conferences, at the Uber Design Nights, for example, also now remotely at a lot of conferences, so that's another aspect I wanted to highlight. Okay, I hope that was helpful for you to see and that this provided you with some inspiration on how to talk about impact from a perspective of design impact and not necessarily business impact. Of course, if you do have business impact that you can talk about with your project, talk about it. Make sure you include it in your work. But if you don't have it, or if you want to add on in addition to that design impact that you've had, that's awesome as well. Lastly, if you want to talk about this and more with me one-on-one, you can always book a mentoring session with me over on SuperPear. Have a great week. Talk to you next time.